Hello, my name is Brianna. This is my first ever YouTube video. I am launching or starting a Booktube channel in which I'm hoping to talk about books, books that interest me, books that I love, books that maybe I don't love. But I thought I would take the opportunity in this first video just to introduce myself, talk a little bit about the kind of books I read, and what I'm looking to talk about in the future. I really recently graduated from graduate school where I was concentrating in creative writing. I received my MFA in poetry, but now that I've graduated and I am moving away for the first time in many years from an academic environment in which I was able to discuss books and literature sort of almost constantly, I thought this would be a great opportunity to keep talking about books in a way that challenges me, in a way that I enjoy. In the past, I have watched booktube channels, come across a lot of great books this way, so I'm looking forward to trying my hand at it myself. I think in my understanding or my observation that there seems to be a heavy emphasis on YA literature, which is great, and it's nice to see YA as a genre being given a critical consideration that perhaps it is not afforded in other places. However, despite the fact that I do enjoy YA and will pick up a YA book now and then, it's really not what I read most widely. Is probably what I read the least of. That's not because I dislike it. I just have moved away from it. I read mostly literary fiction, nonfiction, and then poetry. I read a lot of poetry, probably more than the average person off the street. I do think that poetry is sadly underread. As someone who writes poetry, but who also taught poetry in creative writing classes and seminars, I think it was very obvious to me that many people just don't read poetry. Often I would ask my students, when is the last time you read a poetry collection? And many of them would say, I have never read a poetry collection ever in my entire life. Which is sad, but understandable given the fact that there is just no emphasis placed, I think, on poetry. I think often it's like you read Ode to a Grecian Urn and then maybe an Emily Dickinson poem, and then you sort of move on. And I think there's this sort of critical conversation or idea among some literary critics that poetry is dead. You'll often see, like, once a year, a long think piece about the fact that poetry as a genre has died. It has been destroyed. It is sort of no longer. But I think what the problem with that kind of conversation or understanding of poetry as a genre is that I think often those critics are sort of collapsing the very real fact that poetry is not widely read and is also not very marketable or commercially successful or viable, with the fact, and they sort of confuse that or sort of make the assumption then that there sort of is no longer a vibrant community of poets, writers, and readers, which I think is extremely false. There are so many wonderful poets, both established and upcoming, and also really a lot of presses that are devoted to publishing really wonderful contemporary poetry collections. So in the future, I hope to sort of talk more specifically about poetry. I thought I would talk really briefly about some of the books that I'm sort of reading right now or recently finished or I'm hoping to read sort of in the immediate future. So I will start, because I talked about it for such a long time, with poetry. When I read poetry, I often read more than one collection at a time, and I often don't read them straight through. I often will be reading 2 or 3 collections at a time, and it will take me a couple weeks to get through them because I can sort of slowly digest them. But I'm reading 3 different separate collections. The first is The Big Book of Exit Strategies by Jamaal. This was very recently published. All of the poetry collections I'm reading have been published in the last year, I believe. But this one I think came out perhaps in April. And this was published by Alice James Books, which publishes a lot of really wonderful poetry collections. But Jamaal is a wonderful poet. He has one previous collection. His previous collection is called Hum, which I read a year ago and really enjoyed. So I'm sort of making my way through the big book of exit strategies. Have not finished it, but I'm really enjoying it. Next, Voyage of the Sable Venus. I believe this book was the winner of the National Book Award in Poetry this year, and I believe this is her first collection. I actually have had this for a while, bought it over winter break, and then promptly forgot it at my mother's house. But now I have sort of rescued it and have begun to sort of make my way through it, and I'm really, really enjoying it. Just a really lovely collection of poems. Then I am reading a few, or have bought a few, nonfiction books. So the first is The Curse of Beauty. The subtitle is The Scandalous and Tragic Life of Audrey Munson, America's First Supermodel. So I actually had never heard of Audrey Munson before, but I guess she is the model for a lot of really famous statuary, particularly in New York, sort of during the Gilded Age. I had never heard of this book before. I think it was really recently published, but I read an excerpt of this, I believe, on the Daily Beast, and it was just really fascinating. So when I saw this in the bookstore, I just sort of snatched it up. Lastly, with nonfiction, I just finished this one. This is Among the Janeites, A Journey Through the World of Jane Austen Fandom. I don't read a lot of classics. Even when I was taking these PhD seminars in graduate school, when it came to Jane Austen, I faltered, did not often finish the books that were assigned. What I am interested in is sort of this idea, like the ephemera that it sort of has created, the fandom that has sort of sprung up around her work, the retellings, the movies. I think there's a Jane Austen society, people who dress in the Regency era clothes, devote their lives to both Jane Austen and also this sort of time period in which she was writing and lived. But I had never actually finished a Jane Austen book. So I read this, which was really wonderful and well-researched and funny and just really great. The author herself talked about, like, you know, what Jane Austen meant to her. I kind of sort of came to the realization that I really needed to give Jane Austen another chance. So I did pick up Emma, which I actually had not tried to read before, but I did finish it. I actually really enjoyed it more than I thought I would. But because I enjoyed it so much, because I recently finished this, I decided that I was going to try to read through her novels. The next time I'm going to try is I'm going to try to reread and actually finish Pride and Prejudice. I've made it maybe about a third of the way through before, but have never finished it. So this is going to be something that I'm going to try to accomplish. And then lastly, another recent release that I picked up is The Sport of Kings by C.E. Morgan. This is a book that is set in Kentucky, and it's about horse racing. So I was sort of very interested in the premise. It has also, I think, been on a lot of lists of, like, you know, must reads of 2016. So I'm really looking forward to that. So those are the books that I either have recently read, am reading, or am planning to read in the immediate future. But I will be back with more books. Thanks for watching.